The only heir is my daughter. You all are worthless, my daughter-in-law screamed in my face. I didn't answer her. That night, I hugged my 3 grandchildren, and we left the house, taking with me the secret of the $60 million and leaving on the table the DNA test that could shatter all her lies. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. That morning, the Cleveland sun was beating down hard, hot enough to burn your soul. I was standing in our small kitchen, flipping pancakes on the griddle, trying not to let them burn. The smell of the pot of beans simmering rose up, but it wasn't enough to cover the poverty that clung to every corner of the house. On the table, there were just a few pancakes, a plate of beans, and a cup of coffee so thin it barely tasted of anything. I glanced over at Michael, my little boy of just 3, playing in his old wooden crib with some broken toy pieces. Roger, my husband, was sitting at a corner of the table, scowling, muttering something about breakfast. Beans again, Sarah? How do you expect me to get through the day on this? His voice was sharp, like a knife twisting inside me. I bit my lip to keep from answering him. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just trying to survive another day. Then, like a strange gust of wind, everything changed. A brand new, shiny car glided down the alley in front of the house. The silent engine stopped, and I heard a door open. I peeked through the dusty window. A woman got out of the car, dressed very elegantly, with her hair in a high bun and heels that glittered in the sunday. Her gaze passed over me, cold, as if I wasn't worth a second of her time. Roger jumped up and quickly put on a white shirt, the only good one he had, the one he wore to church. He splashed on some cheap cologne, the kind that smells really strong, and filled the whole kitchen. My heart sank. "Where are you going?" I asked with a trembling voice, though I tried to sound calm. Roger didn't even look at me. He just answered dryly, "Business." He went out and opened the car door for that woman, with a gesture as delicate as if she were a treasure. She smiled and handed him a fat, bulging envelope. Their eyes met as if they shared a secret I could never be part of. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still clutching my old, worn dress. Roger turned and looked at me one last time. There was no warmth left in his eyes, only an icy determination. "I can't keep living in this misery, Sarah," he said in a monotone voice, as if reciting something he had memorized. "She can give me a better life." Those words struck me like a lightning bolt. Before I could say anything, he was already getting into the car. The car started, leaving a cloud of dust in the alley. I ran after him, shouting his name, but my voice was lost in Michael's cries coming from the house. But the car had already disappeared at the end of the street, taking with it the entire world I thought was mine. I returned to the house, my feet heavy as if I were dragging stones. Michael was still crying, and his childish sobs drowned out the sound of my heart breaking into pieces. I hugged him tight, as if letting him go would mean losing him too. My tears fell, wetting his curly hair. The kitchen felt empty. Only the smell of cold beans and burnt pancakes remained. I felt lost, as if I were in the middle of a desert, not knowing where to go. My neighbor, Mrs. Rose Miller, came running. She must have heard the shouting from afar. She put her arm around my shoulders, her voice full of pity. "That man didn't deserve you, honey. A man like that, you're better off without him." I nodded, but the pain was tearing my soul apart. Deserved him or not, he was still the man I had once loved, with whom I had hoped to build a home. That night, I couldn't let myself sink into sadness. Michael needed milk, diapers. He needed a strong mother. I went to knock on the door of Anna's bakery, an old acquaintance, to ask for a job on the night shift. "Can you give me a hand?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Anna looked at me, then at Michael asleep in my arms, and nodded. "Of course, Sarah. Bring the boy with you. We'll put him to sleep next to the oven to keep him warm." That night, as I kneaded the dough with my hands, my eyes burned from the smoke and tears. Michael slept in a wicker basket I had brought, and every now and then he would stir and let out a little whimper. His cries mixed with the noise of the mixer, making the other bakers look at me with pity. An older woman brought me a glass of water and shook her head. "This is how it is for us women. We suffer a lot, but our children are the reason to keep going." I nodded, swallowing my tears, without stopping my kneading. When I got back home, the little house was sunk in darkness. The chirping of crickets outside seemed to tell my story. The story of an abandoned woman, with nothing but her son and a broken heart. I lay down on the old bed, listening to Michael's steady breathing. Looking at the water stains on the ceiling, I knew my life had taken another path. A path without Roger, without the dreams of a complete family. I took my son's hand and whispered to him, "As long as I have you, Mommy can handle anything." But inside I was terrified, afraid I wouldn't be strong enough, afraid the days to come would be filled with darkness. Time passed quietly, like raindrops on the tin roof, leaving no trace but a constant sound. Michael grew up in my arms, but the shadow of his father, Roger, was a void that was never filled. I watched my boy grow, from a little one who clung to my legs crying for milk, to a tall young man with the same eyes as his father, sharp but filled with restlessness. I had hoped he would be different, that he wouldn't follow in Roger's footsteps. But life is never how you want it to be. When Daniel entered his teens, I started to notice bad signs. He would come home late, his shirt ironed but smelling of cheap whiskey, and his eyes red as if he'd been in a fight. "Where were you so late, Daniel?" I would ask. He would just grunt. "Don't worry, Mom. I know what I'm doing." And he would slam his bedroom door, leaving me with an anxiety that ate me up inside. One day, Mrs. Rose, my good neighbor, pulled me to a corner of the yard and whispered, as if afraid someone would hear her, "Listen, Sarah. Your son is spending a lot of time with Ashley, Mr. Cyans's daughter. Be careful, that girl is no good." I nodded, thanking her, but with a knot in my stomach. I knew Ashley, a pretty girl with long black hair, who always wore short skirts and had a bright but calculating look in her eyes. I just prayed to God that Daniel wouldn't get into trouble. A few months later, on a drizzly afternoon, someone knocked gently on the door. I opened it and saw Ashley, her eyes full of tears and a hand on her already swollen belly. She looked at me, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Miller, I'm pregnant. Daniel said he would marry me, but now he's disappeared." I froze, feeling the floor open up beneath me. History was repeating itself, but this time it was my son, not Roger. I let Ashley in and made her a hot tea. "You can stay here as long as you need to," I told her, though the pain was breaking my soul. "But where is Daniel?" Ashley shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He said he was going away for work, but I called him and he won't answer." I hugged her, trying to hide the disappointment that was suffocating me. That night, Ashley slept curled up on the old armchair, and I stayed by the stove, watching the fire, wondering what I had done wrong for my son to become a man like that. Soon after, Ashley gave birth to a baby girl and named her Desiree. I looked at my granddaughter's tiny face, her big round eyes identical to Daniel's, and felt a mix of love and sadness. To get money for milk and diapers, I had to pawn my wedding ring, the last thing I had left from my marriage to Roger. The jeweler looked at me with pity. "Mrs. Miller, are you sure?" "It's a memory." I nodded, swallowing my tears. "My granddaughter needs it more." With the little money they gave me, I bought what was necessary for Desiree, but every time I saw my empty hands, I felt a hole in my chest. Less than a year later, trouble knocked on my door again. Another young woman, Melissa, came looking for me. She worked as a waitress at a dive bar near the market. She had bleached blonde hair and a voice hoarse from cigarettes. "You're Daniel's mom, right?" she asked, with a hand on her barely noticeable belly. I nodded, no longer surprised. Melissa told me, full of anger, he promised he would take care of the baby, but last week he told me he had to go to Chicago on business, and I haven't heard from him since. I invited her in, served her a thin coffee, and listened to her talk about Daniel's promises I knew he would never keep. When Melissa gave birth to Marcus, I brought him home. The little house now felt tighter, with Desiree and Marcus sharing an old mattress. I gave my bed to the children and started sleeping in a hammock hung in a corner. Every night, the cold air seeped through the cracks in the wall. I covered myself with a thin blanket, but there was nothing that could warm the cold I felt in my soul. Not even 2 years had passed when another young woman appeared. Teresa, a young student, stood at my door, her hands trembling on her pregnant belly. "Are you Daniel's mom?" she asked, in a voice so faint it seemed she was about to cry. I just nodded and offered her a chair. Teresa told me, her eyes red. He told me he loved me, that he would take me to New York City to start over, but now I can't find him anywhere. I listened to her with a dead heart. Once again, my son was leaving a child behind without a father. When Teresa gave birth to Kevin, I brought him home, even though we no longer fit. My 3 grandchildren, Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, slept squeezed together on the torn mattress, while I remained in the hammock, listening to them cough in the night. Mrs. Rose brought me some old blankets and baby clothes she got from the church. "Oh, Sarah, how much you suffer," she told me with teary eyes. "But God will help you." I forced a smile, but inside, I no longer believed in miracles. To support my 3 grandchildren, I had to get 2 jobs. During the day, I pushed my hot dog cart through the Cleveland market, shouting until I was hoarse. "Hot dogs! Get your hot dogs! Get your hot dogs here!" The smell of hot dogs and onions wafted from the cart, but I didn't dare eat one myself. I saved the leftovers for the children. At night, I cleaned a small hotel near downtown. It was hard work, mopping floors and washing sheets, until my hands swelled up. One day, I saw myself in the hotel bathroom mirror and noticed I already had gray hairs, my eyes sunken. "Sarah, when did you get old?" I asked myself. But then I would think of my 3 grandchildren at home and grit my teeth to keep going. One morning, Desiree got very sick, with a fever that burned her body. I carried her and ran to the public health clinic at 5 in the morning, waiting in line among a crowd of people. The nurse shook her head. "She needs a special medicine. Here we only have something to bring down the fever." I panicked. I ran to the pharmacy near the market and asked if they could give me the medicine on credit. The pharmacist looked at me and sighed. "Mrs. Miller, you already owe me a lot. I'll let you have it this time, but next time it will be difficult." I nodded, thanking him 1,000 times, and hugged the medicine bottle as if it were a treasure. When I got home, I gave the medicine to Desiree and stayed up all night watching her, stroking her forehead and praying. "Please, God, don't take my little girl." That night, just as I managed to get Marcus and Kevin to sleep, a car pulled up in the alley. Daniel came in with an ironed shirt and his hair styled with gel, very different from the disheveled young man of before. The new car gleamed under the moonlight. He looked at me and gave a half smile. "Mom, are the kids okay?" Before I could answer, he took out his wallet, put a few bills in my hand and said, "I'm very busy. Take this to help with them." I looked at the money. It wasn't even enough for a week's worth of milk, and I felt a lump in my throat. "Daniel, you can't keep abandoning your children like this," I said, my voice trembling. He just shrugged. "Mom, I'm trying to get ahead. I'll take care of everyone later." With that, he turned, got into his car, and disappeared into the night. I stood there, with the bills clutched in my hand and tears running down my face. My 3 innocent grandchildren were sleeping inside, and I was carrying the weight of a whole generation. One morning, while arranging the hot dogs on my cart, Lupe, who sells vegetables next to me, pulled my arm and whispered, as if afraid someone would hear, "Hey, Sarah, your son is a big shot now. He was on TV, on the local news." I froze. The hand holding a warm hot dog bun began to tremble. "On TV, Daniel?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Lupe nodded and pointed to a nearby convenience store where a small television was on. Another vendor, John, joined the conversation. "They say he invested in some land in New York City and hit the big time. Now he's rolling in money." I stood there, with a mix of pride and pain. Pride because my son, who grew up in poverty, was now being mentioned on television. But pain because I knew he no longer remembered his mother or his children. That afternoon, I borrowed a gossip magazine from Mrs. Rose. On the front page was a picture of Daniel, in an elegant black suit, standing next to a gleaming Audi. His smile was huge, but his eyes looked cold, no longer resembling those of the boy who once hugged me, crying for milk. The headline in large letters read, "Young Cleveland entrepreneur strikes it rich in real estate." I read it and felt like I was suffocating. It was true he had gotten ahead, but at what cost? The cost was me, Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, the ones left behind in the little house with the leaky roof in Cleveland. The next day, while mopping the hotel floor, I heard the familiar sound of a car stopping in the alley. I ran home, my heart pounding a mile a minute, hoping to see my son. Daniel entered, taller, smelling of expensive cologne instead of cheap whiskey, but he didn't look at me with the eyes of a son. He just handed me a thick envelope and said dryly, "Here, Mom. I can't stay tied to this poverty. I have a new life now." I took the envelope, my hands trembling, wanting to ask him about his children, about Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, the children who carried his blood. But before I could open my mouth, he had already turned and was heading to his car. The engine roared, and he disappeared, just as Roger had abandoned me years ago. I opened the envelope. There were only a few bills, not even enough to support the children for a month. I felt my heart clench. "Daniel, my son, why did you become like this?" I whispered, as tears fell onto the dirt floor. A few weeks later, a wedding invitation arrived, on glossy paper with gold lettering. Daniel was marrying Isabella Thorne, the daughter of a construction magnate from New York City. The wedding would be at a luxury hotel in Manhattan, a place people like me could only dream of. I held the invitation, read it over and over, but I didn't see my name or my grandchildren's on the guest list. "Mrs." Rose told me, her voice full of amazement. "Sarah, did you see the wedding in the paper?" Isabella wore a very long white dress. There were crystal chandeliers sparkling everywhere, and reporters were crowding to take pictures. It was a huge event. I nodded, but I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My son, whom I raised with my sweat and tears, was now entering a strange world, a world where there was no place for his mother or his children. From the day of the wedding, Daniel stopped calling. I tried to call him, but his number was always out of the service area. Once, I gathered my courage and took a bus to New York City to find the real estate office where Daniel worked. The building was immense, with gleaming glass windows. It was nothing like I had ever seen in Cleveland. The receptionist, a cold young woman, looked me up and down and said, "Mr. Rodriguez does not take family matters here." I stood there, in my old, worn dress and my worn-out sandals, feeling so small I wanted to disappear. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice trembling. She just shrugged. "I'm sorry. Those are the rules." I returned on the long bus ride, tears streaming down my face. Daniel, my son, now belonged to a world I could no longer touch. A few months later, I ran into Daniel by chance at a shopping mall in Cleveland. I was taking Desiree to buy new shoes, the cheapest I could find, because her little feet no longer fit in her old ones. In the distance, I saw Daniel, still impeccable in his suit, next to a young, arrogant-looking woman with blonde hair and expensive clothes. She was carrying a boy of about 3, with a fair complexion and curly brown hair. I approached, my heart pounding. "Daniel," I called out, my voice choked. He turned, with a surprised expression. "Mom," he said, and awkwardly placed a hand on my shoulder for a second. "This is Isabella, my wife, and this is Simon, my son." Isabella scanned me from my worn dress to my old sandals and whispered to Daniel, "Let's go, darling." I stood there, in the middle of the bustle, and could only nod, though I felt a lump in my throat. Desiree pulled on my hand and asked in a low voice, "Grandma, is that my daddy?" I swallowed my tears and forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, but your daddy is very busy." From that day on, whenever I called Daniel, Isabella's voice would answer on the other end, cold and sharp. "Stop bothering my husband. He has a real family now." Those words were like a stab straight to the heart. A real family? Then what were Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, the children who carried Daniel's blood? I would sit in my little house, hugging my 3 grandchildren, listening to them ask, "Grandma, where is our daddy?" I would just stroke their hair and lie to them. "Your daddy is very busy working, but he loves you very much." But every time I said it, I felt like I was betraying myself. The tears would come, but I would wipe them away quickly. I didn't want the children to see their grandmother cry. One afternoon, during a torrential downpour, I was in the small kitchen washing dishes. The cold water chilled my bones and made me shiver. My 3 grandchildren, Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, were playing in a corner of the house, and their innocent laughter was the only thing keeping me from sinking into loneliness. Suddenly, Desperate knocks on the door interrupted everything. I dried my hands on my apron and opened it. It was Mrs. Rose, pale and soaked. "Sarah, turn on the TV," she shouted, her voice trembling. "There was a horrible accident on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It looks like it was your son's car." I felt my heart stop. I stumbled into the house. I turned on the old television, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the remote. On the screen was the image of an SUV in flames, with a column of black smoke rising into the gray, rainy sky. The reporter's voice came on, cold and clear. The victim, businessman Daniel Rodriguez, died at the scene in this terrible accident on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. My son's name resonated like a dagger in my chest. I fell to my knees on the floor, still holding the wet rag, and the tears flowed uncontrollably. Desiree ran to me and pulled on my arm with her little girl voice. "Grandma, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Marcus and Kevin also came closer, their eyes wide with fear. I wanted to answer them, to say something to calm them, but I had a lump in my throat. I just hugged all three of them with all my strength, crying inconsolably, as if letting them go would mean losing them too. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt icy, and the rain hitting the tin roof was like a hammer on my soul. I sat at the old wooden table, looking at a photo of Daniel when he was a child, with a radiant smile and eyes as bright as stars. "My son, why did this happen?" I whispered as my tears fell on the photo. I remembered the days I rocked him to sleep, the sleepless nights kneading dough to buy him milk. Now he was gone, not to a new life, but forever. But deep in my heart, something wouldn't let me rest, a little voice telling me that things were not that simple. The next day, I took a bus to New York City, to the luxurious wake they had organized for Daniel. I put on the best dress I had, even though it was already worn at the shoulders and faded. The streets were full of life, but my heart was a void. When I arrived, an employee in a black suit stopped me at the entrance. "Excuse me, ma'am, your name is not on the guest list," he said in a cold voice. I begged him. "I'm Daniel's mother. Please, let me in to say goodbye to my son." He shook his head, without a hint of emotion. "Those are the family's orders. I ask that you understand." The family? I was his mother, and they didn't consider me his family? I stood outside, looking through the glass doors. Isabella, Daniel's wife, dressed in mourning, was hugging little Simon tightly in front of the cameras. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they looked fake, like those of an actress playing a role. Next to her, some strange men were laughing and whispering something about the insurance money and transfers. I felt like I was suffocating. They were talking about my son's death as if it were a business deal. I returned to Cleveland with my soul crushed. Mrs. Rose came to see me again with a bowl of hot soup. "Sarah, you have to eat something," she said, worried. I heard Isabella already moved to a mansion in Miami. "How lucky for your daughter-in-law, so young and with all that inheritance." I nodded without saying anything. I sat in my little house, watching Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin eat some oatmeal, and the pain broke my heart. My grandchildren, Daniel's blood, living on scraps while Isabella and Simon were in a mansion, enjoying everything. I asked myself, why? Why did my son have to die for them to have everything? Every night, I dreamed of Daniel. In my dreams, he would appear from a cloud of smoke, look at me, and say with a broken voice, "Mom, I'm not dead." I would wake up with a jolt, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding a mile a minute. The house was dark. Only the quiet breathing of my grandchildren could be heard. I would hold my head, trying to push away those images, but the unease grew inside me. Something was not right. Daniel's death, Isabella's attitude, the whispers about the insurance money, it was all like a puzzle with missing pieces. One morning, while arranging hot dogs on my cart, a card arrived from Miami. It was a white card, with elegant handwriting. "Please, do not contact us. Do not look for us. Our family needs peace." Signed, Isabella Thorne. I read it over and over, clutching the card so tightly it crumpled. "Our family?" I murmured, my voice trembling with anger. "And what about my grandchildren? Desiree, Marcus, Kevin, are they not her family?" I crumpled the card into a ball and threw it in a corner. I felt a fire inside me. Isabella had not only taken Daniel from me, now she was trying to completely erase us from her life. After Daniel's funeral, my life felt like it was covered in a fog. Every day, I continued to push my hot dog cart to the market. I continued to clean the hotel at night, but my soul had no strength. My 3 grandchildren, Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, were the only light that kept me on my feet. But the pain of losing my son was a wound that wouldn't close. The society pages of the Cleveland newspapers were full of photos of Isabella, Daniel's widow, hugging little Simon, calling him the sole heir to the Rodriguez name. I would silently pick up the old newspapers from the stand and sit in my dark kitchen looking at each photo. Simon, with his curly brown hair, his fair skin, and his big round eyes, looked nothing like Daniel or anyone in my family. The more I looked at him, the more confused I felt. Why is he like that? I would ask myself, stroking the photo as if it could give me an answer. One day, while arranging the hot dogs on my cart at the market, I overheard 2 vendors whispering. "Elena, the one who sells vegetables," one said in a low voice. "Hey, don't you think that Simon boy looks a lot like David Thorne?" The other, Carmen, who sells flowers, put a finger to her lips. "Shh, be quiet. Those people have a lot of money. Messing with them is asking for trouble." I was startled and almost dropped the hot dog I was holding. David Thorne. I had heard that name before from Mrs. Rose, who said he was a man who often visited Daniel's real estate office, a tall man, always dressed in gray suits with a kind but cold smile. Suddenly, an idea shook me from within. If Simon didn't look like Daniel, but he did look like David, was there something shady going on? I tried to calm down and continued selling, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. My shout of "Get your hot dogs." That day sounded muffled and weak. As night fell, when Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin were fast asleep, I sat alone by the oil lamp. The little house was cold, only the chirping of crickets could be heard. I took out an old photo of Daniel from when he was 5, with a radiant smile next to the cactus we had outside. Then, I placed it next to the newspaper with Simon's photo. The boy's face was visible in the yellowish light. Daniel's curly hair, my almond-shaped eyes, my mother's slightly short nose. There was nothing of us in Simon. The difference was so clear it sent a shiver down my spine. I whispered to myself, "Sarah, what are you thinking? He's your grandson, your son's son," but the more I thought about it, the less I could sleep. That night, I dreamed that Daniel emerged from a cloud of black smoke. With a pale face, he pointed at Simon and said, "Mom, the truth is in him." I woke up with a jolt, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding a mile a minute. That dream was like a warning that pushed me to act. The next day, I decided to find a way to get close to Simon. I found out that Isabella would be bringing him to Cleveland for a charity event in the main square. It was my only chance. I put on my cleanest dress, an old straw hat to cover my face, and hid in a corner near the square. My heart was pounding, as if I were doing something forbidden. In the distance, I saw Isabella, dressed luxuriously, holding Simon's hand as they got out of an elegant car. The boy was wearing a little white shirt. His curly hair moved in the wind, and he was entertained by a red balloon. I stood there, mixed in with the crowd, without taking my eyes off him. "I just need a clue," I told myself, clutching the shawl I had in my bag. When the reporters surrounded Isabella, Simon wandered off a little, his balloon floating. I approached, pretending to pick up a coin from the ground. Just as the boy turned, I saw a hair caught on his little sweater. With trembling hands, I collected it. I felt that in taking that tiny hair, I was holding the entire truth about my son's life. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone around me could hear it. I turned quickly and moved away from the crowd, afraid Isabella would recognize me. On the way home, I hid the hair in an old handkerchief and carefully put it in my apron pocket. "This is the beginning, Sarah," I told myself, but the fear wouldn't go away. I knew I was entering a dangerous path, but I couldn't stop now. I stood in front of the door of a private clinic on the outskirts of Cleveland, my hand clutching the old handkerchief that wrapped Simon's hair. The wind was blowing hard, bringing the morning chill, but my heart was colder. I had saved every dollar from selling hot dogs, from the nights cleaning the hotel to the point of exhaustion, just to be able to pay for this test. The clinic employee, a young woman with a curious gaze, looked me up and down. "Are you sure you want to do this test?" she asked, in a monotonous but meaningful voice. "The result could change your life." I nodded, trying to make my voice sound firm. "I need to know the truth." My hands trembled as I placed the money on the counter, wrinkled bills, soaked with my sweat. The employee took it without another word and gave me a small receipt. I left the clinic, walking down the dusty dirt road, my heart heavy but with a small light of hope. This was the first step to finding justice for Daniel and for my grandchildren. The week of waiting for the results felt like an entire year. Every day I woke up early to make breakfast for Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, almost always pancakes and beans, because there wasn't enough money for more. I laughed and played with them, but inside, anxiety consumed me. Every time the phone rang, I would jump, thinking it was the clinic. But it was almost always Mrs. Rose asking how I was, or the hotel owner reminding me to be on time. At night, when the children were asleep, I would sit by the oil lamp, looking at the old photo of Daniel. "Son, am I doing the right thing?" I would whisper, as tears rolled down my cheeks. I was afraid the result would destroy everything, but I was also afraid of living forever with the doubt. Finally, one drizzly morning, I got the call from the clinic. "Mrs. Miller, the results are in. You can come pick them up," the employee's voice said. I quickly put on my shawl, my old straw hat, and ran to the bus stop. On the way, I tried not to think. I just prayed, "God, give me strength." When I got to the clinic, the employee handed me a sealed envelope with a compassionate look. I took the envelope, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. I didn't dare open it right there. I just carefully put it in my apron pocket, close to my heart, as if it were a part of Daniel. When I got home, I waited for the children to fall asleep to open the envelope. Under the flickering light of the oil lamp, I broke the seal and my eyes fixed on the paper. A line in bold hit me like a slap in the face. "No biological kinship exists between Simon Thorne and the Rodriguez family." I felt my strength leave me, and I almost dropped the paper. The truth was as cold as a knife in my heart. Simon was not Daniel's son. I sat there in silence, my head in my hands, trying to process what I had just read. All the times Isabella had boasted about Daniel's only son came to my mind. All the times she had pushed me and my grandchildren aside, calling us people who have nothing to do with us. Now it all made sense, but it hurt more than I had imagined. I went out into the yard. The Cleveland sky was falling apart. People were running for cover from the rain, but I let the water soak my face. The rain mixed with my tears, cold, icy, but I felt a strange relief. I finally had the proof in my hands. Simon was not my son's blood. But then, a new wave of questions flooded me. If Simon wasn't Daniel's son, who was his real father? And why had Isabella put on this whole show? Daniel's death? Could it have something to do with this secret? That night, I spread the DNA result on the old wooden table, looking at it as if it were the last piece of a puzzle. Desiree woke up and walked towards me, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma, what's that paper?" I quickly folded the sheet and forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetie. Grandma is just looking for the truth." She nodded, yawned, and went back to bed. But I knew this truth was not simple. It was the beginning of a path full of dangers. I hugged Desiree, feeling her warmth, but my heart was frozen. I thought of Daniel, of the accident, of the whispers about the insurance money at the wake. It was all starting to connect, but I wasn't sure yet. I only knew one thing. If Simon was not Daniel's son, then my son's death might not have been an accident. The DNA result was like a small fire burning inside me, illuminating the truth but also filling me with fear. Simon was not Daniel's son, that was clear. But the bigger, sharper question stabbed my heart every night. Why? Why did Isabella have to lie? And my son's death, was it really an accident? I knew I couldn't stop, even if the road ahead was dark and dangerous. I had to find the truth, not just for Daniel, but for Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, my grandchildren waiting for me in Cleveland. I decided to follow Isabella in secret. One cold, rainy night, I took a bus from Cleveland to Miami. I carried an old wicker basket with candies and handkerchiefs to pretend I was a street vendor. I put on my worn straw hat, pulled down low to cover my face, and told myself, Sarah, you have to be very careful. The bus swayed on the long journey, and the sound of the tires reminded me that I was entering a world that was not my own, a world of money and power. When the bus arrived at the Miami terminal, it was already day. The bright sea sun made me squint. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and began my plan. I found Isabella's white mansion on a tree-lined street, so luxurious it took my breath away. Huge houses with high gates, elegant cars coming and going, and the sound of party laughter escaping. I hid on a corner, pretending to sell my candies and handkerchiefs on the sidewalk without taking my eyes off the mansion's gate. I spent several days sitting there, writing everything down in a small notebook: who came and went, at what time, in which car. I noticed that one man appeared frequently, driving a black SUV, tall, always in a gray suit. One day, I struck up a conversation with a neighbor, an old woman selling coconuts nearby. "Excuse me, ma'am, who is the gentleman who comes to the White House so often?" I asked, feigning curiosity. The old woman looked around and whispered, "That's David Thorne. He's been here a lot lately. They say he was very close to Isabella, even before she married the late Daniel." I felt my heart stop. David Thorne. That name again, like another piece of the puzzle. One night, I sat at a cafe with sidewalk tables, right across from the mansion, pretending to read an old newspaper. Through the large window, I saw David come out onto the balcony. Isabella took his arm, laughing and talking as if they were a real married couple. She was wearing a white silk dress, her hair pulled back, and her eyes sparkled under the light. I felt like I was suffocating. That image was so different from the Isabella I knew, the woman who had called me a nuisance and despised my grandchildren. I quickly wrote in my notebook, "David and Isabella, very close, balcony, 8 o'clock at night." My hands trembled, but I knew I was getting closer to the truth. To keep a closer watch, I rented a cheap little room a few blocks from the mansion. The room was small, with damp-stained walls and a bed as hard as a rock, but I didn't care. Every day I went to the sidewalk cafe and wrote everything down. What time David's car arrived, how long he stayed, what Isabella did. Once, I decided to take a bigger risk. I followed David to the main bank in Miami, not far from the mansion. I hid behind a pillar, pretending to tie my shoelaces without losing sight of him. David went in, spoke with a bank employee, and came out with a black leather briefcase. When he stopped to answer a call, I crept closer, just enough to hear a fragment. "Yes, the life insurance. $50 million. It's done." Those words were like an electric shock. $50 million? A giant insurance policy? And Daniel's death suddenly appeared in my mind as a well-orchestrated plan. I wrote down all the details in my notebook, my hands shaking so much my handwriting came out crooked. That night, lying in the hard bed of my room, I listened to the sound of the waves in the distance. Every sound reminded me that the truth I had just discovered could cost me my life. I thought of Daniel, of the accident, of the column of black smoke on the TV. If my son's death was a murder for money, then I was dealing with ruthless people. I clutched my notebook, hid it deep in my candy basket, and told myself, "Sarah, you have to be even more careful." But deep down, I knew I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far, and the truth about Daniel's death was something I had to uncover, no matter the price. I knew the DNA result and the notes in my notebook weren't enough to unmask Isabella and David. They were just pieces of a puzzle, but I was missing the direct proof, a clear confession they couldn't deny. That idea tormented me day and night, giving me no peace in my little room in Miami. I had to act, even if it meant putting myself in danger. I thought of Daniel, of my son's smile, of the days when, as a child, he would hug me and promise to make me proud. Now it was I who had to fulfill that promise, to find justice for him. One full moon night, with the Miami sky full of stars, I decided to risk everything. I disguised myself as a gardener, with an old, worn jacket, a straw hat pulled down low to cover my face, and a bag of old tools I had borrowed from the old man who sold coconuts. In the bag, I had some shears, a small trowel, and my notebook, my only weapon. I walked towards Isabella's white mansion, my heart pounding so hard I felt it would burst from my chest. The high gate was closed, but I noticed a small path on the side that led to the back garden. I hid behind some bougainvillea bushes. The branches scratched my arms, but I didn't care. Through the glass door of the living room, which was slightly ajar, yellow light escaped, illuminating the silhouettes of Isabella and David sitting on a sofa. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Isabella's voice reached me, low but clear, sharp as a knife. "The accident was perfect, David. No witnesses, no evidence, nobody suspects a thing." I felt my blood run cold. I clutched my old shawl with all my might to keep from screaming. David replied in his deep, cold voice, "With the insurance money, we'll be untouchable. $50 million, Isa. We did it." Those words were a stab straight to my heart. Daniel's death wasn't an accident. It was a planned murder. I started to tremble, tears streaming down my face, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions win. This was my only chance. I took my old cell phone out of my pocket, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. This phone, the one I used to call my grandchildren, was now my last hope. I pressed the button to record, trying to keep my hand steady, pointing towards the glass door. But in my nervousness, my hand brushed against a small pot nearby. The pot wobbled and fell to the ground, making a dry thud in the silence of the night. Isabella's voice stopped abruptly. I heard the creak of the sofa, and then footsteps approaching the door. My heart stopped. I hid deeper among the flowers, holding my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. A small, white, fluffy dog ran out of the house, barking loudly at me. I shrank back, breaking into a cold sweat despite the cool sea breeze. "Isabella, you're getting paranoid," David said in an annoyed tone. He gave the dog a little kick, which yelped and ran off. It was probably a cat. Isabella muttered something, and the footsteps receded. The glass door closed, but without locking. I waited a few more minutes until I was sure they had returned to the sofa, and then I crawled out of the bushes. I still had the cell phone in my hand. The recording was still running. I quickly checked it. The voices of Isabella and David were audible, a bit low but clear. It was the proof I needed, but also what filled me with terror. If they found out I had heard them, I didn't even want to imagine what would happen. I left the mansion in the darkness, walking quickly but silently. The way back to my room felt long and lonely. Only the sound of the Miami waves crashing on the shore reminded me that there was no turning back now. I passed by the beach, the moon reflecting on the water, but my heart found no peace. The recording on my cell phone was like a bomb, ready to destroy everything, but it could also blow up in my hands. I clutched the phone, put it in my pocket, close to my heart, and told myself, "Sarah, you have to succeed, for Daniel." The recording on my old cell phone was like a ticking time bomb, keeping me in a constant state of anxiety. I clutched it every night, afraid that if I let it go, the truth about Daniel's death would vanish. After days of hesitation, I decided to take it to the Miami police headquarters, hoping that justice would be on my side. I entered the station, my worn sandals squeaking on the cold stone floor, hugging the cell phone as if it were a treasure. Detective William Vargas, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze, received me in a small, paper-filled office. I told him everything, from the DNA result to what I had overheard outside the mansion. When I played the recording, the voices of Isabella and David sounded, faint but clear. Vargas listened, nodding, but his gaze didn't reflect the hope I had expected. "Mrs. Miller, this evidence is very weak," he said in a grave voice. "They'll say you imagined it, or worse, they'll sue you for invasion of privacy. Without a living witness or official documents, it's very difficult for us to proceed." I froze. I felt the floor open up beneath me. "But it's the truth," I said with a lump in my throat, on the verge of tears. Vargas sighed. "I understand, Mrs. Miller, but with people like the Thorns, the truth is not an easy thing to accept." I left the headquarters with heavy feet, feeling like I was sinking in despair. Justice, it seemed, was much further away than I thought. That night, I returned to my cheap little room in Miami, where the smell of dampness mixed with the sound of the waves. I sat on the hard bed and cried inconsolably. So many days of risk, so many sleepless nights, only to be told the evidence is weak by the detective. I thought of Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin, my grandchildren waiting for me in Cleveland. What did I do wrong? I asked myself, as tears soaked my hands. I wanted to give up, to go back to my children and forget everything. But then the image of Daniel appeared in my mind, the boy who would hug me and promise to make me proud. "Forgive me, son," I whispered, my voice lost in the darkness. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. 3 short knocks, 2 long ones. I jumped, my heart pounding. "Who is it?" I asked in a trembling voice, clutching the cell phone. No one answered. I thought of Isabella, of David, of the suspicious glances I had noticed on the street. Did they already know I was investigating them? Had they sent someone to silence me? I got up, my legs shaking, and approached the door, grabbing an old wooden chair as a weapon. When the door opened a little, I gasped. It was Daniel, in the flesh, thinner, with a grown-out beard, dressed in an old, worn jacket. His reddened eyes looked at me, full of pain and regret. I broke down and ran to hug him, my tears soaking his clothes. "My son, are you really alive?" I said between sobs, my voice breaking. Daniel hugged me back, his body trembling. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't die. I couldn't let you and the children be in danger." We sat on the floor of the little room, the flickering light of the oil lamp illuminating Daniel's face. He told me everything, in a low, tired voice. The day of the accident, while driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, he noticed something strange, a weird wire under the seat. I pulled over, checked, and heard a ticking sound, Daniel said, his gaze distant. I barely managed to jump out of the car seconds before it exploded. I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew Isabella and David were behind it, so I had to fake my death to look for proof. I listened to him, my heart breaking into pieces. My son, the boy I raised, had almost lost his life to the ambition of others. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" I asked, as the tears continued to flow. Daniel took my hand. His voice broke. "I was afraid that if you knew, you would go after them and they would hurt you. I had to protect you and my children." Daniel told me he had been hiding for months in the mountains of Ohio, thanks to an old friend, Jose, who gave him refuge. He survived by doing manual labor, chopping wood, working in the fields, so no one would suspect. During that time, he secretly gathered evidence: a copy of the life insurance policy, secret messages between David and a stranger, and most importantly, a video of a mechanic they hired to plant the bomb. He regretted it. "Mom," Daniel said, handing me a small USB drive. He recorded a video confessing everything because he was afraid they would frame him. "Mom, this is all I have. We have to take it to Detective Vargas now." I clutched the USB drive. It felt as heavy as the entire world. My tears fell, a mix of happiness for having my son alive and pain for everything he had to go through. That morning, Daniel and I entered the Miami police headquarters, our hearts heavy but full of determination. The small USB drive in my hand seemed to hold the fate of our family. Detective William Vargas was waiting for us in his small office, the smell of old coffee and damp papers hanging in the air. I gave him the USB drive, my hand trembling, while Daniel stood beside me, his gaze firm. When Vargas watched the video, a blurry but clear recording, with the mechanic's confession about how he planted the bomb in Daniel's car, he frowned, slammed his fist on the table, and said in a decisive voice, "Your son is the living witness. This time we have enough evidence to request an arrest warrant." I looked at Daniel, my eyes full of tears. My son, whom I thought I had lost forever, was there, being the key to uncovering the truth. "Thank you, Detective," I said, my voice choked. Vargas nodded. "Mrs. Miller, this time justice will be on your side. But be careful, the thorns are not easy to deal with." That night, Daniel and I returned to the hotel room, waiting anxiously. As night fell, police sirens echoed through the street, and blue and red lights flashed outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw the police surrounding Isabella's white mansion. They brought her out in handcuffs, screaming desperately. "You're mistaken. I didn't do anything." David struggled to break free, but was subdued at the entrance. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut mixed with the sound of the Miami waves, like the final music for their crime. The next morning, the newspapers exploded with the news. "Businessman Daniel Rodriguez is alive. Insurance murder plot uncovered." I read the headline with a mix of relief and pain. Justice had arrived. But the price was years of living with the pain of having lost my son. After those chaotic days, Daniel and I returned to Cleveland. The little house was now full of laughter. Desiree, Marcus, and Kevin wouldn't leave their father's side. "Daddy, where were you for so long?" Desiree asked with shining eyes. Daniel hugged her, his voice soft. "Forgive me, my love. From now on, I'm not going anywhere." Simon, the boy Isabella had called the sole heir, also found a place in our arms. Although he was not Daniel's blood, he was an innocent child. I stroked his hair and said to him, "You'll stay here with your grandma, okay?" The boy nodded, and his radiant smile warmed my heart. One day, Daniel took us all to a charity event at the Children's Hospital in Cleveland. I pushed my hot dog cart and gave them away to families in need. There, Daniel happened to meet Sarah Jenkins, a pediatric nurse with a smile as warm as the Sunday. At first, they only spoke politely, asking about the sick children. But when Sarah bent down to wipe a milk stain from Kevin's shirt, or hugged Simon to comfort him because he was afraid of needles, I saw Daniel's eyes light up, a light I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom, Sarah is very special," Daniel confessed to me one night as we sat in the yard. "I never thought I could love someone again after all my mistakes. But when I'm with her, I want to be a better man." I smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, if she makes you want to be better, then that's real love." Over time, Sarah became part of the family. She would teach Desiree English, explaining each word with patience. She played ball with Marcus, laughing out loud when the boy missed a shot. She taught Kevin how to draw, helping him color his pictures. And to Simon, she read stories every night, in a voice so soft it lulled him to sleep. I would watch Sarah, grateful for bringing the warmth that my family had lacked for so long. "Mrs. Miller, I love being here," Sarah told me once, as we kneaded dough for dinner rolls together. "Your family is very special." I took her hand, my voice choked. "No, Sarah, it's you who makes our family more special." One afternoon, as the sunset painted the yard gold, I saw Daniel kneel before Sarah with a simple ring in his hand. "Sarah, will you build a real family with me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Desiree, Marcus, Kevin, and Simon were all around, shouting with excitement. Sarah nodded, her eyes full of tears. "Yes, Daniel, yes, I will." I stood there, hugging Desiree, tears streaming down my cheeks. After so much suffering, my son had finally found happiness. The wedding was simple, but full of joy, in a small church in Cleveland. I sat in the front row, clapping to the rhythm of the music, watching Daniel in a simple suit and Sarah in a pure white wedding dress. Desiree was the flower girl, walking a bit clumsily but radiant. Marcus carried the rings with great seriousness, though he couldn't stop smiling. Kevin threw paper flower petals, filling the church with joy. Simon ran everywhere, with a laugh so contagious that everyone laughed with him. When the priest gave the blessing, I felt my heart finally heal. So many years of pain, so many nights crying in silence, now dissolved with the laughter of my family. The $60 million trust, the insurance money Daniel now used it to build a new future. He opened a small diner in Cleveland where he sold hot dogs and comfort food, so I no longer had to push my cart under the sundae. A portion of the money went to my grandchildren. A scholarship for Desiree's studies, soccer lessons for Marcus, painting classes for Kevin, and a savings account for Simon. "Mom, I want my children to have a better life," Daniel told me once as we all had dinner together. I nodded, tears running down my face. "Son, just seeing you happy is enough for me." I sit in the yard of my house, watching my family gathered. Daniel and Sarah holding hands, the children playing, their laughter filling the air. I think of the dark days, when I believed I had lost everything. But now, justice had been served, and true happiness had returned with the love and unity of the family. I close my story with an immense peace, knowing that, no matter how hard life was, the love for my son and my grandchildren guided me through all the storms. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We do not tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I am genuinely curious. If it were you, in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you, they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.